In 2005, Rwanda's hillsides were stripped bare. Forest cover collapsed to 10.8%, the soil was dead volcanic clay, and landslides killed over 100 people every year. Experts said restoring these lands was impossible, and every conventional reforestation attempt failed catastrophically. But then, officials tried what critics ridiculed as a stupid backward strategy. That choice would turn ecological disaster into one of the greatest forest comebacks in modern history. The real story of how they did it begins with understanding just how close Rwanda came to total collapse. At sunrise, a farmer named Emmanuel stood at the edge of his terraced plot outside Ruhengeri, watching as the last stand of trees on his hillside disappeared into a haze of charcoal smoke. For generations, these volcanic slopes had been covered in forest, sheltering the soil and feeding streams that wound through the valleys below. But after 1994, everything changed. Waves of families displaced by the genocide and its aftermath poured into the hills, searching for any patch of land that could grow food or fuel a cooking fire. Fields expanded up impossible gradients, eating into what little tree cover remained. Each new homestead meant another grove cleared, another root system lost. The hills, once green and alive, turned patchy and brown. Charcoal kilns dotted the landscape, sending up thin columns of smoke that marked the only affordable energy source left for Rwanda's growing towns. In Kigali and smaller cities, demand for charcoal soared. Trees that had stood for decades vanished in months, cut for fuel or hauled away as rough timber. The price of firewood doubled in just a few years, pushing even more families to cut what they could find. Emmanuel's neighbors, like many across the country, watched their woodlots dwindle to nothing. The soil beneath, once held together by tangled roots, began to slip away with every rainstorm. Subsistence farming carved the hills into a patchwork of tiny plots. With more mouths to feed and less land to go around, families planted right up to the edge of every slope. Without tree cover, heavy rains battered the exposed clay, washing away seeds and nutrients. Crops failed year after year. In the dry season, the ground cracked and hardened, refusing to hold water. In the wet season, rivers of mud swept down the hillsides, burying fields and sometimes entire homes. The memory of children lost to landslides became a bitter refrain in village conversations. Population pressure drove the crisis deeper. Rwanda's population, already dense before the genocide, swelled by more than 2 million in the decade after 1994. With so many people crowded onto the land, every available space, riverbanks, steep slopes, even protected forest reserves, became fair game for cultivation or fuel wood collection. The government tried to enforce bans on tree cutting, but enforcement was nearly impossible when survival was at stake. Emmanuel, like thousands of others, faced an impossible choice: clear the last trees and risk disaster, or go hungry. By 2005, the hillsides that once supported entire communities had been stripped nearly bare. The loss was more than visual. Without forests, the land itself began to fail. Springs dried up. Erosion cut deep scars across the slopes. Year after year, the number of landslides grew, each one a reminder of the cost of a forest lost. For farmers like Emmanuel, the bare hills were a daily reminder that something vital had slipped away, leaving only questions about what could possibly bring life back to the land. By 2005, the scale of Rwanda's ecological collapse could be measured in hard numbers. Satellite imagery revealed that forest cover had shrunk to just 10.8% of the country's land area. Hills that once held dense canopies now stood exposed, their volcanic clay soils stripped bare by wind, rain, and the relentless pressure of survival. The land's ability to hold itself together had vanished. Erosion cut deep gullies across the slopes, and the ground itself became a hazard. Government reports from that year documented a steady toll, an average of 127 people killed each year by landslides. Entire families were lost when saturated hillsides gave way in the rainy season, their homes buried beneath tons of mud and rock. Farmers who had once relied on gentle streams now faced flash floods or watched springs dry up completely. The landscape's natural defenses had been erased, leaving communities exposed to disaster with every heavy storm. The soil beneath these bare hills was classified as compacted volcanic clay, a dense, airless medium that repelled water and choked plant roots. Without the protection of tree cover, the sun baked the surface into a hard crust, while heavy rains washed away what little topsoil remained. Attempts to plant native trees failed again and again. Seedlings wilted in the heat, their roots unable to penetrate the hardened ground or draw in enough moisture to survive. Even where teams managed to get young trees in the ground, survival rates hovered near zero. Year after year, the same cycle played out. Reforestation projects, launched with hope, only to see nearly all plantings die within months. The cost was not just ecological, but deeply human. Families lost fields and homes to landslides. Children missed school to help rebuild terraces or search for firewood farther and farther from home. The pressure on remaining woodlots intensified as every living tree became a target for fuel or construction. In the absence of forests, the country's ability to recover seemed to be slipping away. By the time these numbers reached policymakers, the crisis could no longer be ignored. The statistics told a story of a nation on the brink, millions of hectares degraded, hundreds of lives lost each year, and a landscape that seemed to resist every conventional attempt at healing. The question was no longer whether to act, but how to overcome a problem that standard forestry tools had already failed to solve. In 2007, Rwanda's forestry officials faced a choice that defied every international guideline. The bare volcanic hillsides, stripped of life and battered by years of failed reforestation, would not accept the native hardwoods that policy and tradition demanded. Survival rates for these species hovered near zero. The soil, compacted into dense clay, repelled roots and moisture alike. Experts from abroad, including consultants with the Food and Agriculture Organization, urged Rwanda to persist with native species and warned that alternatives could create new ecological problems. But the evidence on the ground was impossible to ignore. Every season brought more dead seedlings, more wasted effort, and more families at risk from landslides. Facing these realities, the government issued new directives. The plan was radical in its simplicity: abandon the search for immediate native recovery, and instead plant trees that no one wanted for their own sake. The selected trio, Grevillea robusta, Calliandra calathursis, and Lucena leucocephala, were fast-growing pioneers, often dismissed as sacrifice trees. Grevillea, an Australian import, had already earned a reputation among local farmers for stabilizing slopes, but was never considered a true forest tree. Calliandra and Lucena, both nitrogen-fixing legumes, were known for their ability to survive where others failed, but international advisors warned they might become invasive or crowd out native growth. The logic behind this decision was grounded in pragmatism. Rwanda's policymakers understood that the land itself needed healing before a forest could return. These pioneers were chosen for their toughness, their speed, and their ability to do the work that native species simply could not. Grevillea's deep roots could fracture the hardened clay, opening channels for water and air. Calliandra and Lucena, through their partnership with soil bacteria, could draw nitrogen from the atmosphere and inject it into barren ground. Together, their leaf litter would begin to rebuild the organic matter that erosion had stripped away. This approach drew sharp skepticism from international circles. In 2009, a memo from the Food and Agriculture Organization described the plan as backwards and warned it could create more problems than it solved. The strategy was even labeled the stupid trick by some, as it appeared to waste years planting the wrong trees. But for Rwanda's forestry officials, the old methods had already failed. The choice was not between perfect and imperfect, but between action and further decline. By the end of the planting season, hillsides that had been written off as lost began to show signs of life. The unwanted pioneers took hold where nothing else had survived. Officials tracked survival rates, watched for signs of invasiveness, and prepared to intervene if necessary. But the gamble was clear. If these trees could change the soil, they would open the door for the return of the native forest. The risk was real, but so was the chance to reverse a decade of loss. Rwanda's new forest strategy was underway, and the world was watching, uncertain whether this unconventional bet would pay off. A row of saplings waits in the shade behind a small nursery shed. In the center, a worker kneels and gently lifts a seedling from its pot, exposing a tangle of roots peppered with tiny round nodules. These nodules, barely larger than grains of rice, hold the secret of Rwanda's soil transformation, an alliance between tree and microbe that rewrites the rules of recovery on broken land. When the first nurse trees went into the ground, expectations were low. Yet within 18 months, the hillsides began to change in ways no one had predicted. The pioneers, Grevillea robusta, Calliandra calathursis, and Lucena leucocephala, shot up fast, their canopies closing over bare clay in less than 2 years. Where the sun had once scorched the earth, shade now fell in shifting patterns. cooling the surface by as much as 12 degrees Celsius. The air under these young forests grew thick with moisture, humidity climbing by more than 1/3. Rain lingered longer on leaves and soil, and the ground, once hard as brick, began to soften. The real work happened below the surface. Calandra and Lucina, both legumes, reached into the subsoil with roots that split the compacted clay. In their nodules, colonies of rhizobium bacteria drew nitrogen from the air, a process invisible to the eye but measurable in the earth itself. Field studies from 2007 to 2011 tracked these changes. In nurse tree plots, available nitrogen shot up by as much as 400% within 3 years. Leaf litter fell thick and fast, breaking down quickly in the humid shade to form a new layer of organic matter. Soil carbon, once nearly absent at just 0.3%, rose to nearly 3% in 4 years, a leap that had eluded every conventional planting before. The nursery worker pinches a nodulated root and smiles. Here, in the palm of a hand, is proof that the land can be coaxed back to life. The roots not only anchor the hillsides, but also tunnel through the clay, drawing in water and air and making room for the next generation of trees. Even grevillea, though not a legume, sends down deep roots that fracture the hardest layers, opening pathways for water to seep in and for other roots to follow. Above ground, the canopy creates a world apart. Temperatures drop, evaporation slows, and the new microclimate shelters seedlings that would have died in open sun. Under this protective umbrella, native species that were once impossible to establish begin to take root. The numbers tell the story. Where direct native planting failed, the nurse tree method rebuilt the basic chemistry and structure of soil, setting the stage for true forest to return. What looked like a gamble, planting the wrong trees on ruined ground, proved instead to be a precise act of engineering guided by biology. The nurse trees did not just survive, they changed the land itself, turning hostile clay into living earth. In the hands of ordinary workers and farmers, the so-called stupid trick became a demonstration of ecological intelligence, opening the way for a new kind of reforestation that worked with nature's own rhythms. On the last Saturday of each month, Rwanda's hills come alive with the footsteps of neighbors gathering for Umuganda. This is more than a public workday. It is a national ritual mobilizing millions to plant trees, repair terraces, and transform the land together. Between 2007 and 2020, this monthly effort delivered an astonishing 1.2 billion seedlings into the ground, each one tracked from nursery to hillside. In the heart of a community nursery, a worker moves between rows of saplings, checking root nodules, sorting trays, and sharing advice with farmers who arrive to collect their bundles. Across the country, 350 such nurseries produce 45 million seedlings annually, most destined for Umuganda plantings. The mix is deliberate. About 65% are pioneer nurse species, tough enough for hostile soils, while 35% are native trees that will follow once the land is ready. Landowners who commit to maintaining forest cover receive annual payments, $40 to $80 per hectare, rewarding stewardship as well as sweat. Digital tools, from satellite mapping to mobile reporting, ensure every hectare planted is counted and cared for. In the hands of ordinary people, this system turns a social tradition into an engine for ecological repair, laying the groundwork for forests to return where hope once seemed lost. A forest ranger moves quietly beneath the new canopy, pausing to listen as the call of a turako echoes through the branches. The transformation is visible in every direction. Rwanda's forest cover now stretches across 30.4% of the country, a gain of more than 715,000 hectares since the bare hills of 2005. Satellite images show dense green where only exposed clay once lay. Biodiversity surveys confirm the return of 187 native tree species, 23 kinds of primates, including mountain gorillas venturing into new territory, and 412 species of birds filling the air with life. Hydrological models reveal streams that once vanished in the dry season now flow year-round, a sign of recovery, with water availability up 340% and flood peaks during the rains cut nearly in half. The restored forests capture 4.8 million tons of carbon dioxide every year, slowing the pace of climate change.
Landslides that once claimed over 100 lives each year have dwindled to just 11. In the ranger's words, every month brings a species we thought was lost. The land, once written off as ruined, now breathes again. In villages once defined by bare slopes, new livelihoods have taken root alongside the forests. The forestry sector now employs 43,000 Rwandans, including nursery workers, planters, rangers, and guides, generating $127 million in annual rural revenue. Woodlots established with nurse trees provide a steady supply of fuel wood and timber, easing demand on the last native stands by more than 60%. Agroforestry has become a reliable partner for farmers, with coffee and tea yields rising as soils hold more moisture and crops are shielded from extremes. The transformation has not gone unnoticed beyond Rwanda's borders. 21 countries, from Ethiopia to Indonesia, have adopted the nurse tree method to heal their own degraded lands. International funding has followed, with hundreds of millions invested in restoration and carbon credits. Rwanda's experiment, once dismissed as a gamble, now stands as a model, proof that ecological recovery can drive prosperity and inspire change far beyond a single nation's hills. Today, Rwanda's forests capture nearly 5 million tons of carbon dioxide each year, and landslide deaths have dropped by over 90%. As climate crises escalate worldwide, these living hillsides prove that rethinking old assumptions can rewrite a nation's fate. Restoration is not just possible, it is urgent. The real risk now is clinging to what experts say cannot be done. What would you try if failure was not the final word?